I hear way too much about how males compete for females. Frankly, the dynamics of male-male mate competition are just a little too explicit, a little too heavy-handed to get my brain working. A male wants a mate, and so they either attack other males physically, or they do something obnoxious to prove to the females that they're the better choice. They sing a loud song, or shake their tail, or pull up in a Lamborghini. I get it. We all get it. We all understood it the first time we heard of it. I'm a little tired of talking about peacock's tails. I'm a little bored of antlers. I want to talk about how females compete over males. Because there is competition there and almost nobody bothers to talk about it. And that competition gets intense. Especially in monogamous or monogamish species where only one female gets full access to any given male's genes and resources. Especially in species where females are tied to one male for a prolonged period of time. Especially in species where there is an enormous difference between mating with a high mate value male and mating with a low mate value male. Especially in species like ours. Women compete over men vigorously and mostly covertly. And today we're going to talk about how. Fair warning to parents, today's episode is not intended for all audiences. We're going to talk about gossip, we're going to talk about dieting, we're going to talk about makeup and clothing, pretty privilege, the limits of beauty, the evolution of homosexuality, evolutionarily informed self-help, and friendship. And I don't think I could have chosen someone better to talk about these topics with. Dr. Tania Reynolds is an assistant professor of evolutionary psychology at the University of New Mexico. She is an expert in intrasexual competition and behavioral sex differences in humans, well known in my field for her expertise on female-female cooperation and competition, which is the centerpiece of today's podcast. I was taught some of Dr. Reynolds' work as a student at Oxford, and it inspired a great many discussions inside and outside the classroom, along with a wonderful MSc dissertation from a woman in our cohort. So, it was a delight to speak with her today. Thank you to all the donors for making it possible. Enjoy. All right, well, let's start somewhere pleasant and then go to increasingly dark places as this interview continues. Why do women make friends, right? Like, how were female-female bonds helpful for our female ancestors?
It's a great question. It's actually a more complicated question than you might think because, at least with men's same-sex bonds, there's a clear evolutionary advantage insofar as men were competing in groups, throughout human history in the context of warfare, or they also were engaged in more coalitional activity like hunting. And so for women, it becomes more complicated as to why they might form same-sex alliances. Now, some have made the argument, such as Sarah Blaffer-Hurdy, that female allies basically enhanced women's fertility. So being able to recruit other women as allo mothers might have helped women, just enhance their reproductive success by being able to pursue other fitness relevant goals. The argument here being that other women were sources of support, childcare. Mm-hmm. I take an approach that other women might have been useful as coalitional defense partners. So there are data supporting that women tend to use more indirect aggression or relational aggression, where they tend to disrupt a victim's social standing or access to resources. And other data support that this type of intrasexual competition has a coalitional component to it, such that if women know that a same-sex peer has a friend present, they are less likely to spread negative gossip about her. So having female allies might have actually served as reputational defense. And so you might have been able to protect your social reputations and access to resources by having these allies. But they might also help you disseminate your reputational attacks. So Hess and Hagen have done cool work showing that when gossip is repeated by multiple independent sources, people are more likely to believe those statements. So if you have female allies who can reiterate your gossip, you might be more effective in leveraging these reputational attacks against your same-sex rivals. Women are using or can use their female allies as both reputational defense and as reputational offense as in their leveraging of these attacks. Now, in terms of the allo care, there are some data to support that women in non-industrialized societies, so hunter-gatherer women, are aided by the presence of same-sex allo mothers. However, when I looked into these data, the interesting pattern was that their allo mothers, or the women who are supporting them in their child rearing, tended to most often be genetic kin, which can more easily be explained by kin selection rather than as like pure female allyship. And so it was interesting because you hear this claim a lot that other women are allo mothers, but I actually had a hard time finding data that supported that it was non-kin who were helping women with their children. Nonetheless, there are data that women who are well-liked, their children tend to be more likely to survive and be healthier. And so that suggests that at minimum, possibly that having other women like you might protect you and your offspring. Even if they're not actually caring for your offspring, maybe they are, less likely to inflict harm on them or less likely to be negligent towards them.
Wow. Okay. So I was hoping we would start somewhere pleasant, but we're going straight to to the toxic side. Yeah. But that's fine with me. So I guess I'll just kind of paint that picture back for you, and you tell me if I'm confused. You're saying that there are two main explanations for the benefits of female-female bonds. One of them, and this is the more historical one, the one that goes deeper kind of in the anthropological literature, is this idea of alloparenting, where women will help other women raise their young, babysitting, that kind of thing. And this increases a woman's fitness in obvious ways. And so that inspires friendship. And then your view of it, which is newer and comes as a reaction to you not finding as much data on alloparenting as you would expect, given the prevalence of this theory, which I've heard before. Your view is that female-female bonds act as a defense system against gossip and also a social network to make your gossip more powerful when you launch attacks on your rivals. Am I painting a fair picture here?
Yeah, it's similar to the Machiavellian interpretation of intelligence, that one contributing factor to why we might evolve certain capacities is that they can allow us to be more effective competitors, essentially. Now, that's not to say that women never provide any benefits. So along with reputational defense and offense, they might also provide useful information in terms of where are sources of food, so they can provide useful information or maybe aid in giving birth. Midwives tend to be women. So those are cases where female allies might provide benefits. But even if you look at for example, food sharing, analyses, at least in non-industrialized populations, suggest that men's provisioning of food tends to be more widely dispersed throughout groups, whereas women's food provisioning tends to be dispersed more closely within their family. So even in that context, it's not exactly clear why women are forming, same-sex friendships. And it's really interesting because women show really high levels of concern with the status of their same-sex bond. So it's a bit of a puzzle. We can't find, or I haven't found, like, strong evidence as to what exactly women's same-sex allies are providing beyond these data on the intrasexual aggression. Now, Geary has made some arguments that because polygyny was more commonly practiced throughout human history, that part of what same-sex cooperation might be doing among women is facilitating kind of co-wife relationships. So if you have a fellow co-wife and you guys tolerate each other, this might lead to better outcomes for your children compared to if there's a lot of conflict in the relationship.
My personal problem with that suggestion by Geary is that monogamy has very much been the norm for our species. Even though, of course, most societies have allowed polygyny, even in those societies, 95% of men are in monogamous relationships. So the idea that that's going to be a strong enough pressure, that there's going to be enough co-wifing going on that you would need female-female bonds, makes me a little skeptical. And then also, I would view sharing a husband as a very competitive situation for a woman to be in, not the type of situation that you would think would inspire the type of best friends and, girls' nights out and things that we see now, where it's like girls love spending time with each other, women love spending time with each other, have such close bonds with each other. That doesn't seem congruent. And then I guess it's useful that you framed your theory on female friendships, your idea that they act as insulation against gossip and aid to spread gossip. You compared that to the Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis. But one of the reasons that the Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis has fallen out of favor is because it doesn't explain why people would form groups in the first place, right? Because it shows groups as such a cost, right? And so I guess one question that I'd have is that makes, it's like female-female relationships are costly, and those relationships are one of the ways that you insulate against the costs themselves. But it's almost like, why not just run away from women entirely and live solo if there's so much cost involved?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it is really puzzling. And, so many aspects of the female phenotype seems to be designed to evoke care and evoke social support. And so it is a bit puzzling. There are at least investigations of, like, when co-wives are cooperative. You're totally right that there is a ton of intrasexual competition among co-wives, as you would expect, because any co-wife who competes in such a way that gains an advantage for her children relative to her co-wife's children is going to be favored. But there are contexts when they do tend to be cooperative, and it tends to be when there's decent age disparities between the co-wives, where they'll come to some agreement where the younger co-wife will provide care for the older co-wife, and, kind of in exchange, they tolerate each other. So it's possible that maybe that's a model that we can use, that maybe what women are doing when they form allies is maybe it's like an insurance policy that, in case my partner dies, I have some sort of social backup. And so, maybe you don't need to be friends with everyone, but so long as you have one or two really close female bonds, you might have some support in really dire circumstances. I haven't seen strong evidence that is the case. I mean, there are data to support that women tend to prefer fewer friends of a more intimate nature rather than having many friends. And so that could be supportive. However, if you actually look at the pattern of female-female friendships, they're quite vulnerable. They are more likely to dissolve than men's friendships. And so part of that could be if women needed to have really high standards for assessing loyalty, then you would make that prediction that they should be more vulnerable and that only a few friendships will kind of pass that threshold. So it's possible that those data are consistent with it, but it still raises questions of why form friendships at all. But I think if we take the approach that if they're useful for the offensive side of competition, then that could be useful. So maybe the
Right.
women who formed allies and were better able to spread defamatory gossip secured the more desirable mates because they took out their rivals. Perhaps that could be one selective factor.
I'll make one note on the Geary theory. It's interesting that the cases where you see friendships in or cooperative co-wifing are ones where it's an older and younger woman. And that makes sense because that's a less competitive dynamic where the older one, is primarily interested in investing in existing offspring, whereas the younger one is primarily interested in producing new offspring. Even though it's still competing over the same man, it's for different things that they're looking for at those different age brackets. So that makes sense to me. But also, again, it's not like we see the natural pattern of friendship, which seems very instinctive. I mean, people form friendships very readily, very easily, naturally throughout school, throughout work. It's something that people can't help themselves to. And it's not like you're seeing modern women, sharing a boyfriend and bonding over it, right? That's
Right.
not what's happening. It's not like you're seeing younger women seeking out older women as friends because they're in different sexually competitive spaces. No, what we're seeing is women of about the same age who should be competing over some of the same guys, theoretically, forming these close bonds. And we're not seeing a lot of amicability towards the idea of sharing their boyfriends. That actually is considered, a major social violation. But we are seeing what you're describing, which is a lot of gossip and a lot of insulation against gossip. We definitely see lots of attacks on others' reputations and also defense against reputation. I think that now, if we shouldn't have said it earlier, I guess, what are women competing over? What is this competition about?
So, one of the primary resources they are competing over is mates, and access to mates would have been critically important throughout human history, and it still is today. It's the most important decision we probably make. It dictates what genetic traits our offspring will receive, but also what level of support versus conflict we're going to endure. And as we know, there's variation out there in the social world. So not all men are equally kind. Not all men have equal access to resources that are critical to provisioning offspring. Not all men are equally generous in providing those resources that they have. And so, to the degree that men vary in these capacities, that would have been hugely consequential for children's survivorship. Women should compete for access to the men who have all else equal, better access to resources, a greater likelihood of sharing those resources, and a greater likelihood of committing and investing, over a sustained period of time. But because those, men are limited, this leads to competition. And so in sexual selection, which is just, a subtype of natural selection describing competition for access to mates, this often centers on the opposite sex mating preferences. So one way to attract desirable mates is to appeal to their preferences. So if men espouse certain preferences, you should expect that those preferences should be domains of female intrasexual competition. Now, that's not to say that mates are the only thing that women compete over. They certainly could have competed over, access to resources directly. So who's going to have the best foraging site, or access to, social information that's useful in outcompeting rivals. But mates were one primary domain or target of competition.
I mean, I've spoken about a little on this show how men compete over mates. It tends to be this very direct and oftentimes very explicit in terms of its motivations and in terms of its inactions. We see that men will literally fight over women, right? Mm-hmm. And it's often explicitly the case that they are having a physical fight over a woman. And then the competitions that are more subtle aren't even that subtle in themselves, right? Like the subtle version of men's competition, where it's competing over status or money or these things that are really at some level proxies for access to mates. These competitions are also very explicit. They're also very bold-faced. Men aren't hiding that they're trying to attain status. They're not hiding that they're trying to obtain money. And in many cases, they're not hiding that they're trying to obtain mates. But it seems to me that women's sexual strategies or women's competitive strategies are very subtle. It's almost like whether subconsciously or consciously, there's a desire for a veneer of plausible deniability. We see this incredible subtlety to the competitive actions of women that we just don't seem to see as much with men. So I guess I would love to hear more from you on 2 points. One, how do women compete, right? And two, if you agree with me, and maybe you don't, why are these competitive actions so much more subtle than we see in men?
Yeah, great questions. And I do totally agree with you. So if you look around, as you noted, you don't see women getting into physical fights very often, despite this tactic among men. And so one explanation for why you don't see women relying on physical aggression was forwarded by Anne Campbell. So she argued, okay, if women are the primary caregivers of dependent offspring around the globe, which is true throughout human history and across cultures, then when women risked their own lives, they were also risking the lives of their dependent children. So there was so much more at stake. It's not worth engaging in physical aggression if you are not only going to kill yourself, but going to kill your dependent children. And indeed, data support that children are more likely to die if their mothers are not alive and present compared to if their fathers are not alive and present. And so this supports this pattern that basically having a mother absent was a substantial risk for children. And so instead of relying on these physical tactics that risk harm and death, women instead tend to rely on indirect and social tactics, sometimes called indirect aggression, sometimes called relational aggression. And the goal of this aggression is to disrupt the victim's social standing and their access to resources. And so the tactics that are typically used are gossip, so spreading rumors, disclosing secrets, and social exclusion. And so one other goal of these tactics is to not be detected. And part of the reason that's important is because if you're detected, you risk retaliation. And so that could then lead to physical harm. But I think another reason that doesn't often get kind of highlighted is that even if it's not necessarily risking a physical fight, you don't want to risk anything that could disrupt your access to social resources. So you don't want anyone retaliating because if they create a rumor about you that say you're cheating on your husband and your husband believes it enough, that could be the end of, your support, and that could put your children's lives at risk again. So there's a lot at stake here when children's lives are on the line. And even there are some data among, I believe it's the Dogon tribe in Mali, there were a lot of accusations among co-wives of accusing one another of poisoning each other's children, which is just super dark.
Wow.
I don't know how common that was across history. I don't know if it's generalizable to other contexts, but it just goes to show that retaliation could be very costly. And so it's in your interest to hide your competitive impulses as best as you can, especially also given that women often throughout human history were away from their genetic kin. So a variety of sources of data support that many social groups were patrilocal, meaning that upon marriage, women would go live with their husbands and their husbands' kin. And so oftentimes women were separated from their genetic kin and they were surrounded by, their in-laws and these strangers that they might not have known. It wasn't like you could fall back on your kin as easily. And so there's just so much at stake here when you're providing for children. And so with these tactics, this indirect aggression, you tend to see that, perhaps unsurprisingly, the individuals who are most often targeted and victimized are those who tend to be appealing in mating domains. So if you take the male mate preferences, they map on quite nicely with the pattern of women who are victimized. So for example, cross-culturally, you find that men tend to show stronger preferences for physical appearance in mates, and part of that is just because female fertility declines pretty precipitously across age, so cues of youth and fertility tend to be more visible and are prioritized by men. And so what you find is that women tend to target physically attractive same-sex peers with their indirect aggression, even in contexts that are removed from explicit mating environments. So, for example, there are some data that in scholarship and hiring decisions, women tend to negatively evaluate highly attractive same-sex peers. There are data that women tend to disapprove of women who capitalize on their physical appearance to gain access to resources and opportunities. Women tend to show distrust towards women who consciously enhance their appearance, such as through the application of makeup. They report greater willingness to deceive physically attractive peers about romantic opportunities. They experience jealousy and distress in response to physically attractive women. And so this is exactly what you would predict if women's intrasexual competition is aimed at attracting or preserving valuable mateships.
Wow. So you've painted a very persuasive picture that women are engaged in intrasexual competition over mates. It is covert to avoid the intense danger that comes with retaliation in this same domain. And the primary way, from what I'm hearing from you, is through gossip. I've heard a lot about pretty privilege, right? Where women and men benefit greatly from being physically attractive. I think that's quite obviously the case that being physically attractive helps you in a lot of domains. But connecting to some of the stuff that you just said, a peer of mine when I was at Oxford, who was actually inspired by your writing, argued that women who are especially beautiful might actually suffer for it because they are more likely to be treated as a hostile competitor by other women. So you've spoken about the immense disadvantages that come with being gossiped about. And now you've shown us that when you're more attractive, you're going to get gossiped about more. So is there a point as a woman where being more physically attractive actually harms your chances in the domain of mating because it comes with these immense costs because you've got such a target on your back? Or do you think that it's just the case that, yes, it comes with a cost, but even still, on balance, being better looking is still better in most cases and most situations?
My data found that women who were more physically attractive tended to be the favored victims of other women's reputational aggression. So women were more willing to tarnish the reputations of physically attractive same-sex peers. And that makes sense if they're threatening rivals. There are also data that women tend to justify, and these are mostly from ethnographies, that women tend to justify their reputational attacks if they perceive a woman as popular or thinking that she's superior to others. And so I would imagine that if a woman is really attractive and other people are giving her a lot of attention, that is going to put a target on her back. And so it's tough because I mean, there are some data supporting, so for example, Fisher has data that women, if you negatively comment on them, it can decrease their appeal in the eyes of men. However, the people who are most effective, their gossip is the most effective, tend to be physically attractive women. And so it kind of suggests that, like, yes, although gossip can be effective in harming appeal, it's going to be even more effective if you yourself or if the gossiper is physically attractive. And so there are both costs and benefits to being physically attractive. Men are going to prefer you as a mate, but other women might have a hard time kind of being your friend, being happy for you, not wanting to gossip about you or take delight, in your failures. So it can be really tough. And one reason that reputational attacks can be so effective among women is, as argued by Hess, is that there's an aspect of female mate value that is not confirmable. So if women tended to be selected as mates based on their sexual loyalty or their sexual chastity, and evidence does suggest that men care strongly about their same-sex partners' sexual loyalty, and also throughout history they cared about sexual chastity or sexual restraint. And part of this is because men don't have paternity certainty. So if a child is born, they can't be 100% sure that that child is their genetic offspring, at least until, modern paternity tests. So if a sexual history is pretty consequential to women's kind of desirability as mates, well, this is not demonstrable. So if other women claim, oh, she had a lot of sexual partners or she cheated on her mate, you can't really prove this wrong. And so this makes women's reputations pretty vulnerable to attack in a way that men's reputations aren't. So for men, a huge portion of their mate value is based on their ability to kind of acquire resources or be physically formidable. And these are traits that you can demonstrate. If someone wants to call into question your resources, you can just display them. Or if they call into question your strength, you can lift up a heavy object or fight someone. And so Hess has argued that, this put women in a vulnerable position. And so this might have been one way by which physically attractive women were vulnerable, is that, these reputational attacks could have been quite consequential. If it disrupted your established pair bond and your access to, a provisioning mate, then that's a really big deal.
Women often slut shame each other, and I've read that this, at least in the West, occurs far more than men actually slut shame women. And I've read this explained as a kind of self-directed sexism, this internalized misogyny, which may be true to an extent. Of course, it may be true. But you've argued here that women disparage promiscuity as a form of female-female competition, and that this is a really sticky form of gossip because you can't do anything to prove it wrong, right? It's this scarlet letter that's hard to remove. And as you're saying, like, if a man is accused of being weak, or it's suggested that he's weak, he can pick up a heavy object. If it's suggested that he can't provide resources, well, he can display those resources quite easily. And similarly, on the female side, if it's gossiped that she's not physically attractive, right? Well, that's not particularly effective because anyone can see her. What other targets of gossip are like that beyond just slandering their sexual reputation or sexual behavior?
Yeah, so I mean, the sexual information, that one has been more strongly investigated, and I would argue that women have two reasons for using this particular type of attack. So if men tend to show a preference for sexual chastity in their long-term mates because it enhances paternity certainty, then one way to signal how sexually chaste you are is to derogate other women for their lack of sexual chastity or for their sexual promiscuity. So like by this relative comparison, you might look, extra pure. Now, the other reason that women might kind of attack sexually unrestrained women is because these women posed a threat to their established mateship. Schmidt has some awesome cross-cultural data that the women who are successful mate poachers are those who are physically attractive, sexually unrestricted, and erotophilic, meaning like kind of open to sexuality and enjoying sexuality. And so what that suggests is like those are the women, these sexually unrestrained women, those are the ones who were successful at luring away the partners of other women. And so it would make sense then that women should be distrusting of these women and kind of want to proactively aggress against them, maybe as a way of deterring those women from taking their partners. And there are pretty strong data to support that women do penalize these sexually unrestrained women. So they're less likely to befriend a promiscuous same-sex peer. They're less accepting of female promiscuity than are men. In these economic games, women will incur costs just to punish sexually unrestrained women. The victimization data support that the women who kind of started having sex at earlier ages or who had more partners tend to be more often victimized by indirect aggression. And even if you look at just like qualitative interviews with sexually open women, they'll report that their relationships with men were pretty comfortable, but other women treated them with intense bullying and rejection and accusations. And so there's strong data to support that this is one of the primary domains of female intrasexual competition. And it makes sense because if you lost your partner to a mate poacher, again, your children's lives could be at risk. So it might make sense for women to both demonstrate their sexual chastity so they can attract mates, but also try to prohibit other women from stealing their own mates. Now, in terms of what other ways that women call each other out, I have some data with Jamie Palmer Hogg where we looked at kind of a more indirect tactic of slander that women use. And we looked at basically women's friendship sensitivity. That is how likely they are to detect transgressions in their same-sex friendships and repeat those transgressions to others. And so we found evidence that women do tend to kind of hold their same-sex peers to high standards, particularly in the domains of kindness and interpersonal loyalty. So, did she make a joke at your expense in terms of like kindness? Did she make a comment that was insensitive? And then for loyalty, did she forget your birthday? Does she never reach out to you or ask you how your family's doing? Those types of things. And when women detect these transgressions, they are inclined to repeat them to others. So they self-reported this, and other people reported that, yes, their female friends tend to disclose these transgressions to them. And then we looked at, okay, well, what happens when people report these kind of victimization tales describing how poorly their same-sex friends treated them? And we found that they were quite effective in harming women's reputation. So people were we manipulated whether it was a woman disclosing this about another woman or whether it was a man disclosing this about another man. And what we found is that people felt more sympathy towards the female victims who were treated poorly by their friends. They were less dismissive towards them. And they also judged female perpetrators more harshly for these types of transgressions. So they viewed them as more immoral, were less motivated to maintain friendships with them, and they were more motivated to warn others about what bad people they were. And so what these patterns suggest is that women are held to a high standard when it comes to the kind and loyal treatment of their same-sex friends. And these types of disclosures, these victimization tales of like, oh my God, you would never guess how Becky treated me, those types of statements are quite effective in harming women's social opportunities.
Well, I guess that kind of segues into another interesting thing that you've touched on in your research, which is that being a gossip also harms your own reputation, right? So it's this double-edged sword where it's like, yes, you're going on the attack, But in attacking, you're opening yourself up to a very easy counter, which is that, hey, you're not a good friend, right? You're not a good ally, because here you are gossiping. And that class of gossip, which you just described, again, it has this veneer of plausible deniability, because you can say it's like you're painting yourself as the victim in this story, and you're pitching that to everyone as a story of your woes, of your victimization. So it makes it hard for someone to then turn that on you and say you're the bad guy, because you've already positioned yourself as the victim in the story. So I guess we've got two types of gossip then that seem to be particularly effective. And I can think of so many examples from just my personal life, having heard so many of these attacks back and forth. We have attacking women for promiscuity, or quote unquote slut shaming, which is really, it's like a weapon designed in a lab, because it broadcasts your own purity and it attacks the women who are the most dangerous as mate poachers, these more seductive, more sexually open women. And it also can't really be defended against easily, right? You can't prove in public, because sexuality is so private in our species. There's no real lever you can pull to reveal yourself to not be promiscuous, right? It's a really sticky form of gossip. And then we have this other form of gossip that you've just mentioned, where it's, hey, they weren't a good friend to me. They forgot my birthday, as you say. They didn't call me when my mother died, right? These things that make them look bad, but they make them look bad in a way that makes you look like their victim. And so it doesn't even look like an attack when it's pitched. So that's gossip. Are there any other forms of gossip that you would like to touch on, or should we speak on other topics?
Yeah, actually, I looked at another tactic in my dissertation. And so you're totally right that people tend to dislike overtly negative gossipers. They don't tend to trust them. There's also even this pattern where the words that you use are more likely to be associated with you. And so if I keep calling a woman a whore, a whore, a whore, people are going to tag me with the word whore. So there's actually like, just from a persuasion standpoint, it's risky to really be using these super or overt forms of gossip. But beyond that, women in particular are especially distrusting of female gossipers. They tend to, dislike them. They tend to avoid them as social partners. And so even though this is like the mechanism by which women could compete, it's not physical aggression, they also get penalized for using it. And so I looked at, okay, are there alternatives that women might be able to use where you can spread this same reputational information without incurring these social costs? And so one strategy that I looked at was professions of concern. So basically saying, oh, I'm so worried about her. She's been sleeping around a lot, and I don't want her to get hurt. What I basically told you is she's a whore, but I didn't come across mean. I came across as kind. And so I found that people do tend to view gossipers more favorably if they use these professions of concern compared to overt denigration. And so that would suggest that these kind of, if you can accomplish gossip while making yourself look innocent in the process, it's an ever more effective tactic. And so what I think that these kind of findings suggest, so both this friendship sensitivity and these professions of concern, it suggests that women might actually be self-deceived about their competitive and aggressive motivations. Because if you can truly believe you are worried about someone, you are going to be all the more convincing to your social partners. Now, we are bad actors. There's a reason why, Hollywood movie stars make so much money. It's because we can't all act. If we could all act, Angelina Jolie wouldn't get paid much. And so it goes to show that it's easier to deliver information if you really believe it. So what I argue is that self-deception is actually one of the primary features of women's intrasexual competition because it allows them to use these types of tactics without being recognized as malicious or competitive or aggressive, which other women strongly dislike, and men also dislike when they're evaluating their potential mate. So if you can truly believe your innocence, you will be all the more convincing to your social partners that you are innocent or, well motivated.
I'm so glad you said that, because I'm realizing a lot of people listening to this, and I think this happens a lot on my show, a lot of people listening to this will think, well, that's really not what I'm doing, right? This is not a fair description of my behavior. When I derogate someone for their promiscuity, I'm not worried about them stealing my boyfriend. I just genuinely don't think that that's a good thing to be doing socially, right? Or they might, as you say, be like, I was genuinely worried about their alcohol addiction. Or it's like, no, I was truly hurt by their behavior and I really did just need to talk to somebody. I have no doubt that in terms of the internal state of a listener's mind, right? This is what's going on in many cases, where you're not thinking about being competitive. You're not thinking in a Machiavellian headspace. You're just doing what you naturally want to do. You're talking about the topics you naturally want to talk about. I guess what me and Dr. Reynolds are really speaking about is the reason humans evolved to like to do these sorts of things, rather than the reason individual humans choose to do these sorts of things. And I realize I just spoke for both of us, so I'm not sure if you agree with that. But that's certainly how I would come at issues like this. And I would also come at these things the same way in terms of beauty enhancing behaviors, which is another thing I'd like to talk about, such as dieting, such as wearing makeup, such as spending tons of money on nice clothes. I have no doubt that, and this is true for men as well, by the way, I have no doubt that many of the people who are engaged in these behaviors at the internal level, they're doing them because they make them feel good, right? Like when I go to the gym to lift weights, I am not consciously thinking, oh, I want to look more physically attractive. I'm thinking, oh, this makes me feel good about myself, right? But I am clear-headed enough to see that the reason an ape like me evolved to feel good about themselves when they look good is absolutely due to sexual competition.
Just a comment that on what you were saying, I totally agree with you. And like natural selection operates on our behaviors, and we don't always have to hold conscious awareness of why we're doing what we're doing. Like the ultimate function, the evolutionary reason that those behaviors were favored, so long as we engage in them, right? So if we help our kin, our family members, we truly feel love for our family members. But the ultimate reason that we help our family members is because they share genetic copies, or they share similar genes to us on average. So we're essentially helping our own genes when we help our family members. But at the proximate level, like what we're thinking in the moment, it feels nothing like that. It doesn't feel like I'm making a calculus of like, well, my sister on average has 50% of my genes, therefore I will help her move. Absolutely
Right.
not. Instead, I'm just like, of course, this is what I'm going to do for my sister. I love my sister. And so I think it is worth kind of disentangling the proximate from the ultimate, that, natural selection cares or favors certain behaviors, but doesn't necessarily favor our having, explicit awareness of why we do what we do. And so when people express these motivations, I totally agree with you that they are earnest, so when women, feel that they're sharing information about their friends, problematic drinking or their promiscuous sexual activity, they probably truly do feel worried. But you can stop and look at kind of the consequences of that behavior and say, okay, if I really care about my friend, is telling 3 people about her behaviors actually helping her? Or what are the consequences of that? And it might be, sure, I'm expressing my concern, but in the end, she gets a dock to her reputation because I have now shared this information. Or, I was truly hurt by my friend's actions, but in repeating those actions, I'm now, harming her reputation. Is that really my goal? And so I think by at least acknowledging the outcome of these behaviors, even if they're not what we're consciously thinking in the moment, we can at least reach an informed decision at that point. Should I share this information? Because now that I know these are the consequences of it, is that actually what I would consciously like to achieve?
Another element here is that things that were adaptive in the past aren't necessarily adaptive now. Selection can put something into our brains that now doesn't have the same function. So let's say it's true, and maybe it's not there, obviously, but hypothetically, since we spoke about this earlier, let's say that Sarah Hrdy's theory of allomothering as the cause of female-female friendships, the evolutionary cause, is true, right? That's plausible, but it's completely congruent with the fact that you never babysit for your best friends, right? Like that's the instinctive cause of friendship can be separated from the ultimate cause of the instinct for friendship. So I guess with all those levels intact, anyone who's listened to the first 40 minutes of this and felt that it's not congruent with their lived experience as a woman or as a man for that matter, I would just have all of those signposts in your head if you choose to listen back. But in any case, I would love to move on to other forms of female-female competition. There's multiple ways that women compete with each other for mates, and one of them that I find particularly interesting is beauty enhancement, and also you've done some work on dieting. So I would love to hear you talk about that if possible.
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked a lot about intrasexual competition, and that is one way to obtain the mate that you desire, is by kind of denigrating your rivals, making them seem less appealing. However, another way is just enhancing your own appeal by appealing to the preferences of potential mates. And so we talked about how, across the globe, men tend to prioritize physical attractiveness in their partners. And part of what these bodily cues that men are preferring are signaling are age. So as we age, our body changes, but also kind of parity. So our status in our reproductive career. As we get older, not only do we deposit more fat on our bodies, but as we have subsequent births and pregnancies, we also deposit fat on our bodies. So one cue of being relatively young and not yet having existing offspring is to be relatively thin. And what you find is, although preferences for thinness do vary across cultures, on average, a cross-cultural preference for female thinness. And part of the explanation might be that this is just a rough cue of being relatively young and not yet having kids. Now, if men tend to show this preference, on average, then women might be inclined to kind of alter their appearance in this domain, particularly because they might perceive it as more under their control, right? So we can't really control how wrinkly our skin is, well, at least not until like modern retinol, thank God. But, prior to that, what was under our control was, our body size. And so I hypothesized, along with my colleagues, that in contexts where mating competition is really intense, so one such context is a female-skewed sex ratio, so meaning that there are more women of reproductive age in the population relative to men of reproductive age. And basically what this is tracking is the degree of mating competition. So if there are many more same-sex rivals, if there are many more other women than there are potential mates, this means competition to secure a mate is going to be more intense. And so what I predicted along with my colleagues is that in these contexts, you should expect that when women perceive there to be an abundance of other women in the population, they're going to feel more competitive with one another in kind of mating domains, and that this is going to lead to body dissatisfaction and dieting motivations. And so if this is, if appearance is something that potential mates are going to scrutinize, and weight is it's perceived to be more controllable aspect of our appearance, then you might predict then that women are going to feel worse about their bodies and more motivated for thinness. That essentially these cues of a really intense mating environment kind of activate this body dissatisfaction and appearance enhancement motivations. And so indeed, what we found across 4 kind of correlational studies is that when women perceive there to be more women in their mating pool, their local mating environment, they felt more competitive with their same-sex peers, they felt more dissatisfied with their bodies, and they felt stronger motivations to diet and lose weight. And then we even did one experiment of this. We told them, like, we want you to evaluate these profiles because we're testing out this like kind of university dating site. And we skewed the profiles such that they either depicted more men or more women. And what we found is that compared to the women who were in the female skewed condition where they saw a lot of women, the women who were in the male skewed condition where they saw a lot of potential mates, they actually felt less motivated to lose weight, suggesting that when women perceive themselves to be in a more favorable mating environment, characterized by more men in the population, they feel less pressure to modify their bodies. And so this is, an application of sex ratio that's been used in multiple species to look at how it changes mating dynamics, and it's applied to humans to show that it can affect how women, feel about their own bodies and are the strength to which they are motivated to alter their appearance to attract mates.
That was all very well said and very much coherent and persuasive. But another view of thinness that I've heard, I guess one area of research that I'm sure you're familiar with is the waist to hip ratio research, which was, I think, pioneered in the 90s. And it was surprising at that time because the archetype of female beauty at that time was like rail thin, very skinny. And yet the research showed that when you took men into the lab, the BMI or weight of the women wasn't as important to their attraction level as the waist to hip ratios were. And then now we see that the fashion has very much changed in terms of what's viewed as attractive by within the kind of female celebrity space. And we see women who have undergone intensive body modification to have waist to hip ratios that are more extreme than the male preference generally is. So I guess one area that I would love some commentary from you on is whether what women perceive as attractive physically is actually in line with what men are attracted to physically. And then question number 2, whether women are competing to be the women's ideal of what's attractive versus the men's ideal, and whether the kind of alternate view of thinness as not a evolved attractive trait, but as a culturally mediated one, whether there's any validity to that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've seen debate in the literature. So there are some data that suggest that women want to be thinner than what men prefer. But I've also seen other data where they had men and women kind of select their ideal body type. And I believe they used like 3D images. It was like higher quality figures. And men and women's preferences were pretty strongly aligned. It's unclear which it is that's going on here. Is it that women overshooting kind of men's preferences? And that's
Right.
possible. I believe there are data showing that men want to be more muscular than what women actually prefer. And part of the argument there is that men are actually kind of displaying their coalitional value to other men. And so, because other men value formidability in their same-sex peers if men were often involved in like hunting or warfare. And so it's possible that something similar might be going on with women where their kind of competition amongst each other is overshooting what men are interested
Yes.
in. Now, I think it would be cool to look at, it's possible, I've had this idea, I haven't tested it, but I'd be curious. So one thing that being thin does is, at least anecdotally, actually, no, there are data on this, that being thin is associated with facial attractiveness. And so
Hmm.
what I wonder is possibly if women are maybe overshooting men's men's preferences and erring on the side of a little too thin, they might actually be enhancing their facial attractiveness at the cost of their body attractiveness. And there are data, I believe it's by Paraloo, where they found that when you asked men, it was such a cool study. They basically gave men a woman she had her face covered and her body covered. And they asked men, okay, imagine you're looking for a short-term sexual partner. What would you like to see? And men tended to lift up the covering of her body to investigate her body. And then when they asked men, imagine you're looking for a long-term partner, men tended to lift up the flap looking so they could evaluate her face. And so what I've wondered from that is like, okay, if men tend to prioritize facial attractiveness when assessing long-term partners, then possibly what women are doing, if they're overshooting the thinness kind of domain, maybe they're erring on the side of increased facial attractiveness. Now that's speculative, but it could be one hypothesis for what's going on there.
What matters about facial attractiveness? Like, why does what does facial attractiveness signal, and why would it be more relevant than bodily attractiveness in terms of long-term mating?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's possible that maybe with facial attractiveness, maybe we can more easily detect asymmetries, or so maybe it's a stronger like indicator of like, genetic mutations. Like it's probably harder for us to see, is your left arm longer than your right arm, but we can see is your left eye larger than your right eye. So it's possible it's detecting or
But
it's
wouldn't that also be sorry to interrupt, wouldn't that also be important in a short-term mating context? Like that's just cues to genetic health as well.
Totally. Yeah. Maybe it's like a cue of kindness. Like we're better than average at detecting those things from facial cues, and that would be more consequential in a long-term partner if they're, going to be caring for your children and you're investing in them. But then if it is like using facial cues as a proxy of kindness, you might expect the same pattern among women then, that women would also be inclined to lift up the face for the long-term partner when assessing men, and then maybe like the body for a short-term partner. So I can't remember if they looked at women's decisions, but that would be interesting.
So obviously every heterosexual man and woman is born into this world where they have to compete for mates, right? And they have to compete for mates with members of their own sex. And so intrasexual competition is at some level so predictable, it's banal, right? Of course, we're going to compete over mates. But is there any evolutionary competition between men and women, right? Like are there cases where women are competing with men rather than competing over men, and men competing with women rather than competing over women? And I'm obviously talking outside of the modern context where there's much less division of labor and we're competing over the same jobs and the same resources and things like that.
I'm really interested in genetic competition between the sexes. So there's some cool research showing that like the father's genes manifest differently in the fetus or the child because the father doesn't have the same interests as the mother. So from the father's perspective, his child is definitely his child, and he doesn't know if future children sired by that woman will be his. So from the child's perspective, from the father's perspective, it's in his interest for that child to extract more nutrients and resources from the mother because he doesn't know if future children will be his. So father's genes will tend to make infants more needy, they'll cry more, whereas mother's genes, when present in infants, will tend to make infants more docile, because from the mother's perspective, she knows that the future children that she has from her body will be her own. And so she has a stronger interest in kind of allocating her resources and attention more evenly across this child and future children. So mother's genes will tend to make children more like soothable. They don't tend to cry as much or have as many issues, like sleeping through the night. And so I think that's a really cool example where you can see kind of the genetic interests of men and women's not being aligned and it leading to conflict.
That's another great illustrative example of how our evolved interests, the ultimate explanation, is not necessarily in line with our proximate experience. I doubt any of the fathers listening would intentionally pass on genes that make their infant cry more. But in any
Right.
case, I guess on the other end of things, do you have anything to say on male-female friendships?
Yeah, there are some data that suggest that the preferences that we have for our opposite sex friends tend to be pretty closely aligned with our mate preferences, suggesting the possibility that what we're really doing when we're looking for opposite sex friends is potentially looking for backup mates. That if we're using the same criteria to search for our opposite sex friends that we are for our mates, then if something doesn't work out with our mates, we will have backup mates ready to go. Now, I'm not sure that people do this necessarily consciously, but it suggests the possibility that that is kind of the function of opposite sex friends. Now, it's also hard to say. I mean, so for example, in the case of women, when they're looking for particular traits in their male friends, one function of a male friend might be protection. And so, and mates also provide that to women as well. So it's hard to say, like, well, maybe it's just the case that you need male friends that will physically protect you. And so you're going to see similarities there. Beyond that, I think it's interesting.
Yeah, that piece of evidence has always struck me as quite equifinal because, yes, women are attracted to men who are physically protective, both in the sense that they're able to protect and willing to protect using force. But that's still attractive even in a non-sexual context. Obviously, having a buddy who is super strong and willing to throw down on your behalf, that's appealing. So it's hard to know whether that's just a straight up benefit of friendship, period, or if it is a benefit that comes with mating. Because we also see that when men are looking for male friends, they prefer men who are willing to protect and able to be violent. So yeah, that piece of evidence could go either way. Do men look for anything in women friends that is out of line with what they look for in women mates?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It would be interesting if, for example, men might use their opposite sex friends as kind of for empathy and social support, because that is not something that is necessarily encouraged in male-male dynamics. So men, when they're looking for their same-sex friends, tend to prioritize like strength, courage, toughness, risk-taking, which makes sense if we're thinking about, building an alliance for the battlefield or for hunting. But that can make it challenging when you need to express vulnerability to your male friends. They might not be, as sympathetic as maybe your female friends would be.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess that's one function that you mentioned of female friendship that's absolutely true, is that oftentimes, as a man, the women who you're friends with will introduce you to women who you end up dating, and in some cases even marrying. Although I don't know where that fits in strategically on the woman friend side, especially if he's viewed as a backup mate. And I know that Bus has some research on women expressing that they'd be very upset, in some cases even devastated, if their backup mate ended up entering a relationship or getting married or anything like that. But in any case, so in bonobos, our closest relatives, and I'm asking you this since you're an expert on female-female cooperation, we see that female-female bonds are often enforced by sexual behavior. And at least in the West, I've read that women's sexuality is more flexible than men's to an extent. There's higher engagement in bisexual mating strategies and things like that. Although, huge asterisk, I can't remember any specific data I've seen on that. So a couple of my former classmates wanted to know from you whether you think homosexual behavior in human women is, in some cases, like in bonobos, partially to facilitate higher cooperation and bonding among women.
Yeah, so it you're right that women's sexuality tends to be more fluid than men's. And there are data to support that, including like physiological data. So like women show more sexual responses to a variety of stimuli compared to men, where men tend to be show stronger preferences in the favor of one sex or another, as well as self-identification. So more women identify as bisexual than men who identify as bisexual. So there are a few hypotheses about women's same-sex attraction. So one hypothesis is consistent with what you were saying, that it possibly reduced conflict among co-wives. That is, if women were often in polygamous marriages, that perhaps by having same-sex attraction, this might reduce conflict within the household. I haven't seen strong data on that. There's a hypothesis that part of women's same-sex attraction is just weak selective pressures. That is, whether women were attracted to men or women throughout human history, they probably didn't have much autonomy in deciding whether to get married and whether to have kids. And so because of that, same-sex attraction wasn't selected against across most of human history. There's also a hypothesis that maybe it helps women secure allocare. That is, like, if you lose your male partner, say due to warfare, that perhaps you can recruit, someone who would help you care for your children, and that just might have happened to be a woman. And so there are a few hypotheses. However, the data that I've seen, at least among bisexual women, seems to suggest that bisexuality in women might be kind of a relic of a faster life history strategy. So life history theory kind of describes how organisms allocate resources across fitness goals. So for example, you could decide, not consciously, but an organism could, develop really slowly and take a long time to reach sexual maturity, and then maybe have like a few offspring that they invest heavily in. So an example might be elephants, of a slow life history strategy, whereas a faster life history strategy species might reach sexual maturity really early, have a lot of offspring, and not invest heavily in each of them. And so an example of this would be salmon. They just basically they just lay a ton of eggs and hope that some of them work out. Part of these differences depend on how dangerous the current environment is. So if you're in a really dangerous environment, it doesn't make sense to take a long time to develop and reach sexual maturity. Instead, you need to reproduce really quickly before you die, basically. And if it's super dangerous, then each offspring has a lower likelihood of surviving, so it might be in your interest to have more of them. And so people have looked at these differences among humans. Now it's debated whether the same kind of properties manifest and hold within a species compared to across species. However, there are some data to suggest that there are differences among humans, such that some individuals reproduce earlier, have more offspring, and those individuals tend to have shorter lifespans on average compared to those who reproduce later, have fewer offspring, and invest more heavily in those offspring. So there are some data to support that some of these same patterns hold among humans. And at least what you find among faster life history strategists in humans, they tend to have more sexual partners. One argument for why they do this is to kind of have children with greater genetic diversity, and that they can, basically, if you have different sexual partners, each child is going to be more different compared to if you had all children from the same partner. And so there are some data to suggest that bisexual women show kind of traits associated with having a faster life history strategy. And it's possible that one reason you see this same-sex attraction in women might be because having a faster life history strategy was particularly favorable among men. That basically men who kind of had a lot of sexual partners increase their reproductive success. And the argument being that same-sex attraction and kind of a faster life history strategy in women might be somewhat of a byproduct of those advantages that were accrued to males who were faster life history strategists.
Wow. So that's fascinating. Am I correct then in interpreting what you're saying as there is a theory that has some data suggesting that strong selection on male multiple mating led to an increased prevalence of bisexuality among women? Or have I completely misread that?
No, yep, that's correct. That's the argument. And you do see you see certain patterns that kind of support this. So for example, compared to their heterosexual peers, non-heterosexual women, they tend to have more masculinized profiles that correspond to faster life history strategies. So on average, of course this doesn't apply to everyone, but they tend to be more unrestricted in their sexual orientations. They show more sexual risk-taking, more sensation-seeking, higher levels of like substance use, which is kind of one behavioral measure of like risk-taking. So differences in kind of impulsivity. And so it's possible that part of what's going on here is that some women who are adopting these faster life history strategies might also be more inclined to be non-heterosexual due to their kind of masculinized profiles. And what's argued to be the mechanism is like masculinized hormones that kind of serve as the dial for this life history strategy speed. So having a more masculine hormonal profile leading people to be showing slightly more fast life history strategies on average.
Wow. Fascinating. Is there a theory of male homosexuality and bisexuality that is kind of sitting across the aisle from that, or are those theories different?
Yeah, those theories are different. And I should argue that like the primary proponent of the life history and the masculinization, that's Severi Lowoto. So he's the one that has forwarded a lot of data regarding that. So one contributing factor to male homosexuality is the fraternal birth order effect. So it's this interesting pattern where basically the more older brothers a man has, the higher the likelihood that he will be attracted to men. And so what's hypothesized to be the mechanism there is that it's basically the mom's immune system is kind of recognizing the antigens produced by the Y chromosome. Her body is like, what the heck? I don't have Y chromosomes. This must be foreign. And so the argument is her body develops kind of an immune response when she's carrying a male fetus, and that each time that she has a pregnancy with a son, her immune system is getting stronger and stronger and attacking the antigens produced by the Y chromosome. So it's basically like impeding the masculinization of the fetal brain. So that's the hypothesis for the fraternal birth order effect. And I think it's something wild, like 30% of men who are same-sex attracted owe their sexual preferences to the fraternal birth order effect.
Yeah, I've heard that the numbers are pretty high on that. So I take it then that homosexuality, the original kind of suite of adaptationist or adaptionist, depending on which term you prefer, theories have fallen by the wayside, and now we're looking at more spandrel type effects on both sides. Am I correct in seeing that as the current landscape, or are adaptationist theories still in vogue in some cases?
There are still adaptationist arguments for male same-sex attraction, and one of those being that it enhances the reproductive success of men's female relatives. And there are some data to support that same-sex attracted men, their female relatives have more children. And so now there are studies trying to investigate the mechanism. Like, for example, are these female relatives, do they have more physically attractive bodies? Do they have, wider hips? Like, what is the mechanism by which this is occurring? As far as I know, so there was for a while a hypothesis that maybe gay men were basically providing allo care to their female relatives. But as far as I know, there isn't much evidence in support of that. Now, it's possible this could also be, maybe in a modern environment where we live farther away from our families, it's not true, but it would have been true across human history. But as far as I know, the evidence isn't super strong for that. However, there are some data to suggest that their female relatives are having more children on average. And so this might be an example of selection whereby the genes that enhance female fecundity or reproductive success, whatever their mechanism, when present in males, contributes to same-sex attraction.
To wrap this up, and you've been great, by the way. Thank you for taking so much time out of your day to discuss these wide-ranging topics. I guess I'll just take us back to where we started. I would love to know if you have an opinion, and it's okay if you don't, if you have an opinion as to whether and how women might use this knowledge of their competitive landscape to their advantage in their personal lives, not from a reproductive standpoint, becoming a better gossip, although I'm sure plenty of the information would be helpful here. Gossiping about promiscuity is particularly powerful, as we've learned. But is there anything that women can take from this conversation that will help them live more fulfilling lives, knowing more about their evolutionary history here?
Yeah, so I think in the context of intrasexual competition, it can be useful to kind of identify the mechanisms so that you can recognize it in your personal life. So, if it's the case that most of gossip happens through these tactics of like pro-social concern or, someone expressing how their friend let them down, then we might be able to recognize that and say, okay, I am not going to trust this person with my personal information, because although she might not be using the tactics that we commonly think of with gossip, it's still nonetheless disseminating that information. So I think you can make better social decisions about who to trust. You can also call people out when like, hey, if you choose to, although it's risky, but you could say like, hey, if you really care about her, why don't you try to help her rather than talking about her? So we can recognize bullying in all its forms. So I think that's useful. It's also helpful to, I think, some of the work on like women's friendship preferences, that we hold these high standards for one another, can be useful in kind of keeping ourselves in check, that like, hey, I might lose a lot of friendships if I keep holding my friends to such high standards. And so maybe one way to keep that in check is to, when we feel like a friend has let us down, to instead think about, okay, well, how has she been there for me? What are all the ways by which she's been a loyal friend versus this one instance where I feel like she's, doesn't care enough about me? So I think it can be useful to understand that we have these really high expectations, so that way we can preserve our friendships rather than letting them dissolve. And then, I don't know, I think that some aspects of evolutionary dynamics can be pretty depressing. Like, I think the one that was hardest for me was thinking about how strongly women's mate value is tied to their appearance and their age. Like, couldn't be more out of our control. And so that was something that really depressed me for a while. But I think having explicit awareness of that forces, or for me at least, like the way that I would navigate that is be like, okay, I shouldn't put too much of my self-worth into this thing that's going to change with time. Instead, I should focus on cultivating skills that I could strengthen across a lifetime. or strengthen relationships across a lifetime. So putting your eggs in other baskets other than, your physical appearance or your youthfulness. And so that it's been at first sombering, but now I'm like, okay, now that I know this, I need to just accept it. And the sooner I accept it, the more that I can cultivate these other strengths that'll be long lasting. And I do think something that is probably controversial, but is worth thinking about, it's something that I'm pretty interested in, is like how women find meaning in later life. And anecdotally, it seems like a lot of women take meaning in their children. And so I wonder about women's decisions to have kids, and like whether we know now what will give us meaning later in life. And so I'd like to look at data on that, and just to see, like, what are some alternate strategies for deriving meaning outside of having kids. And maybe it's being, a really involved aunt to your siblings' kids, or kind of serving in a role where you are some type of teacher or mentor might kind of simulate that, or maybe having pets taps into that same, caregiving psychology. But I fear that if that is something that gave our female ancestors meaning throughout life, then that might be one of the strong predictors of meaning among modern women's lives as they age. And so just having some awareness of that, and coming up with some type of plan that if you decide not to have kids, just knowledge that maybe you'll find meaning in some way that kind of mimics it. So just coming up with like a conscious strategy for that, if it's the case that was often a role our female ancestors were in later in life.
Huh. What a wonderful and comprehensive answer. I'm very glad I asked you that, and I'm very much looking forward to the evolutionarily informed Tania Reynolds self-help book for women. I hope that's on the horizon for you. Anyway, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for an awesome conversation. It's been my pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. This was a delight. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again to Dr. Tania Reynolds for a very interesting conversation. You can follow her on social media and keep up with her fascinating work using the links in the show description. Thank you again to the donors who make this show possible every week. I'll talk to you all again soon. Until then, have a great couple weeks. And remember to be kind to animals.